Good morning, everyone. My name is Chloe Tetro, and I am the health coach here with Ready Care. And for today's podcast, we're going to be looking at mindfulness. Particularly, we're going to be looking at what it is, the particular benefits that it has, and how it interacts with the brain and what we can do to really harness that. So, to begin with, what is mindfulness? So mindfulness is a term that most people would be fairly familiar with in whether it be in the workplace or in personal life. It's something that's really it's an ancient practice to begin with. So it's over 2,500 years plus, and would have emerged from the Buddhist tradition. So mindfulness is a practice within the Buddhist tradition. But as it has come to kind of our contemporary understanding of it, there's been somewhat of a shift in what it is and maybe the context in which mindfulness sits. So from the 1970s onwards, a fellow by the name of Jon Kabat-Zinn, which you might have heard of, he's the man that would have originally come up with the 8-week course that would be very popular as an introduction to mindfulness, particularly in the Western world. It is the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, or MBSR course, which has been offered by hospitals, schools, workplaces as a way to combat stress-related symptoms, whether that be psychological, emotional, or physical. So from the 1970s, mindfulness started to emerge in the West with a more kind of grounded force. Throughout the 90s, it was utilized a lot in psychotherapeutic work, and more recently, so from the 2000 upwards, as the field of neuroscience emerged and grew, neuroscience looked at really having a look at what is involved in the individual's brain. Because they could see there were definite measurable results in individuals that underwent the 8-week course and other practices. So they really wanted to hone in on what it was that was happening in the brain when people were practicing mindfulness. And mindfulness can be a lot of different things. Mindfulness doesn't need to be a kind of rigid spiritual practice. For example, if somebody doesn't have a spiritual practice, if it's something that they don't personally resonate with, there can be a bit of resistance to utilizing mindfulness. But really, mindfulness is described in its essence as being in the present moment with awareness, and being in the present moment with acceptance of the present moment. So that would be a kind of more contemporary scientific way to have a look at defining what a mindful state is. So in itself, it's a flexible state of mind. It's not a rigid way of thinking. It's not an automatic process. It's a flexible state of mind in which we become aware of the present state and we're accepting of it. And what I mean by accepting of it is that we don't necessarily over-identify with thoughts and emotions as they come up, but rather we observe them for what they are without looking at them from a judgmental perspective. So what would kind of tend to happen as well is that there's a level of for it to be mindful, let's say, there's a level of deliberate focus. So it's something that you deliberately sink into. It's not a reactive state. It's something that you deliberately sink into. And there was an interesting study actually that I think it's the chambermaid study, whereby a group of ladies were there were women on the study. A group of women that were chambermaids were asked if they exercise, and of the ones that didn't, a lot of their metrics were gathered up. So their weight, their muscle mass, their body fat, and they were then walked through how their job was very similar to working out. So how lifting heavy things was akin to lifting weights, how running up and down stairs was akin to using a stairs machine. And they were just they were asked to think about that throughout the following weeks. What was recorded then was that just through the simple act, they were doing the same work, but just through the simple act of having awareness of what it was they were doing, their bodies responded as if they had been working out. So their body fat dropped, their muscle mass increased, and they hadn't been doing anything different. It was just having the awareness of it and that mindful task that actually brought a physical reaction to what they were doing. So the link between mindfulness and physicality is one of the ways that that it's been measured. So I guess the benefits overall, we would all be fairly familiar with the benefits of mindfulness, just even from chatting to people. But stress reduction is one of the big ones. There is a massive increase in the markers of well-being, so lowered stress levels, increased focus, lower instances of depression, better physical immunity. So there's that link again where an increased focus in and awareness actually has a physiological effect. Individuals that undertake a mindfulness practice tend to be more objective in viewing their own lives and their experiences, which can be like an applied way of looking at that is when an individual experiences a challenge or a setback, that they're not embedded in the experience. They're not, they're not totally identifying with feeling angry about a setback. They're able to have a little bit of distance from it, view it, and in that respect, they're able to really have a look at it, observe it, and question it. Have a look at maybe if there's cognitive disruptions around that, things we'd have chatted about in previous videos, things like is there black and white thinking involved in how they're approaching a problem? Is there a way that maybe they could get around the issue a little bit better? The mindfulness practice reduces negative thoughts, again, because of something similar, that you're able to have that little bit of distance and not entirely over-identify with a thought, an emotion, a reaction. They've got calmer minds, reduced emotional reactivity. And we would know that from real world experience that when we're in an overly reactive state, like what's that thing people say? If never text back when you're angry, give yourself the 10 seconds, go for a little walk, or never answer an email when you're angry. And to really have a little bit of distance, create that little bit of distance, that's something that a mindfulness practice can really, really bring. It's the increase in the self-awareness that helps with self-regulation, and self-regulation is massive. There's going to be greater control of trigger responses. So if your environment is extremely stressful or demanding, instead of really, really being reactive and going straight to an emotional state or going straight to an automatic state, you're going to be able to have a little bit of distance from it and really plug into your prefrontal cortex and go, okay, rather than just act from this young space, this angry reactive state, or whether it be anger, stress, or sadness, to really take a moment. So you're training that muscle. You're training that muscle, inverted commas. You're training that ability that you have to pause, to take stock of where you're at, to give yourself a moment to recenter, so that you're not at the constant mercy of an external response stimuli. It creates more volition. So what I mean by that is, if you are in that state where you're not just simply reacting, but you're acting, that is, you're choosing where you want to go with something, you're choosing how you want to respond, you're choosing what is the thing that would best serve me from this interaction, or best serve my long-term goal, or best serve my current job situation. And you have that that exercised and built up ability to take a moment, what you're going to find is your behavior is going to change drastically, because it's going to facilitate bringing you closer to how you want to be, how you want to show up, how you want to bring yourself closer to the things that matter to you. So that would be kind of a very broad overview of some of the benefits. There's lots of there, but for the sake of time, I'll keep it succinct. So in the brain, what's actually happening in the brain? So I mentioned initially that there's two factors, and that's how mindfulness or mindful states, I should say, are measured is by these two factors. So attention to the present moment and acceptance of the present moment. So let's have a look at what maybe not being mindful could look like. So as we know, the brain processes a huge amount of data, far more than our let's say our waking brain can deal with. We're getting loads of sensory input all the time, and there's a huge amount of energy utilized in that. And because we're living creatures, our brain will label things that help us to survive as the most important thing to focus on. So it starts to create shortcuts in the brain of, is this a good thing, a bad thing? Is it a dangerous thing? Is it something I want to go towards? So it's starting to break all of these bits of information into something it can reach a lot quicker. There's a lot of shortcut categories, and that brings us to the automatic thoughts. So we'd have touched that a little bit on a previous podcast in terms of so much of how we experience our lives and how we respond to our external environment is based on automatic thoughts. So all of these shortcuts that the brain went, well, it's kind of like that thing that happened before, so let's pretend this is the thing today. And with that, there's a kind of lack of awareness, a huge lack of awareness, actually. We can find ourselves in conversations that we're not exactly sure what the point of it is. We can find ourselves kind of going through the motions, getting ourselves to work, not really knowing, oh, when did I get here? So there's a lot of habitual things that we go through in our everyday. So action without thought is a huge kind of it's a huge marker of automatic thought and not being in a mindful state. Now, this can be very, if we have trained ourselves to utilize habit towards something that we want, if we've trained ourselves to utilize our brain's propensity to reacting to triggers in ways that we want, and created positive habits, things that now we don't have to think about because it's gone into the automatic thought system, that's brilliant. So if that degree of awareness was there to begin with and some of the behaviors are positive habits, that's brilliant. But by and large, a huge amount of our brain and our behaviors and how we move through the world is off of automatic behaviors. So with the mindfulness, having awareness of the present moment and having acceptance of the present moment kicks you out of that mode and back into activating your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is the area of your brain that is most responsible for executive decisions, things that bring you closer to what you want as an adult here and now, knowing where you currently are and what state you desire to be in. So you're much more able to make decisions that are good for you in the long term. So in our brains, there is this theory called the quantum zero effect, whereby what we focus on gets bigger. And we've heard kind of different ways of that being said. So, for example, we get more of what we focus on, or we can amplify what we focus on. And from a brain perspective, the more you focus your attention on something, the more it holds in place the brain circuits associated with what you're being focused on. So a way to put that in kind of an applied way, a practical way, would be if you are emotionally dysregulated, for example, and you've had a terrible phone call and you feel yourself kind of spiraling and wobbling out. If you think of a time that you were particularly calm, and you really sink into it, you take a moment, you silence the phone, you just take a second or even time 2 minutes on your phone and allow yourself those 2 minutes and really sink into what did it feel like that time that I was exceedingly calm, and focus on, you want to give your brain as much information about that time as possible. So where was I? Who was with me? What were the sights like? What were the sounds like? What did it feel like? Was there a breeze? Was there the sound of water? The more information you give that, the more your brain starts to utilize the banks of sensory information that it has on that particular moment, and the more you're going to start to feel calm. You're telling your brain, this is where we're going. Right. So that's one of the, like, a small little example of how you can use the quantum Zeno effect to help you to train your brain into getting a desired effect from it. So a mindful state also switches us out of that default brain network and more into a task positive network. So we have a few different neural networks in our brain. And again, the default brain network is the one that, as the name would suggest, we usually default to, and it's very much associated with the automatic brain. Mindfulness helps us to tap into the task positive network. So again, it's one that is more focused, more concentrated, and more able to have a look at how we can utilize our internal resources to move us closer to something that we desire. So that be, or that could be a state, or it could be the performance of a task. There's greater decision making. Emotional processes tend to lead to poor cognitive processes. So we'd notice that, like the example of somebody who's come off the phone, if they have a task to do immediately after, they're not really in it. Especially linear task thinking, structured task thinking, it tends to absolutely dampen our ability for cognitive reasoning. So training with mindfulness can help to bring down the emotional processes and bring up our cognitive processes for rational thinking. We're more able to observe. We have less cognitive biases because instead of running on automatic, and cognitive biases would be a very shortcut way of thinking about something. It's, we once saw an example of this one thing, therefore all things that slightly resemble that thing are like that. I remember an example from college, a textbook, literally a textbook example, was if you lend your friend money and they tell you they will pay it back and they don't. An example of a cognitive bias would then be, friends are not trustworthy with money, or I can't trust people to pay me back. So that's a very baseline example of a cognitive bias. But mindfulness will tend to bring those down and actually be able to contextualize and observe something within a broader picture. So from the studies done, just 20 minutes actually of mindfulness, and that may not necessarily mean mindfulness meditation. It could be a mindful practice. So I'll explain that a little bit more. So just 3 consecutive mindful sessions of 20 minutes long, in whatever way you choose to bring it in, starts to show some of the benefits that I've chatted about. So things like calmer mood, reduction in risks of depression, better cognitive function, better emotional regulation. Any task that you bring present awareness to and present acceptance to, acceptance too can help to kick your brain into that mindful state. So if you're somebody that doesn't particularly have a spiritual practice or doesn't necessarily think that way, it's not particularly for them, there's a brilliant author, and he is also a neuroscientist and a philosopher, Dr. Sam Harris. He's got a book called Waking Up, which is brilliant. I remember I got it as a audible gift, so audiobook gift, a while back, and absolutely brilliant. It's very much rooted in the scientific approach to mindfulness, measurable outcomes, how to create a practice that suits you. And I'd really recommend it for those that would kind of had tended to shy away from mindfulness because of maybe its roots in Buddhism or anything like that, that there are pathways to it that are, not affiliated with any spiritual practice. One of the tips I would give for developing a practice is choose a point in the day and a task in the day, and it can be anything. It can be anything at all. Some people choose eating. Some people choose going for a short walk. Some people choose even their morning routine. So getting dressed, brushing their teeth, everything that's associated with your morning routine. And just tell yourself, I'm going to do this task mindfully. So what does that mean? Do you have to close your eyes? Do you have to do X, Y, Z? Not particularly. You can if you want. Basically, all it means is sinking into your senses. So sink into any sense that you like or all of them. So the more awareness you bring to the task, the better. So a good entry point is, how does my body feel while I'm eating? How does my arm feel when I lift it up? What can I hear when I'm chewing, when I'm cutting food, when I'm rustling a packet of something? What am I looking at? What type of colors do I see? And calm the mind as much as possible and sink into that moment as much as possible, using your five senses, using your somatic, your body felt experiences. How do you best sink into that moment to create awareness and acceptance of that present moment as best you can? Make sure that you notice what comes up, but try not to judge. Don't. A good way is, if thoughts come up, just wave at them. Just let them float by. Don't worry. It's just for that amount of time while you're doing an exercise. You don't have to involve yourself with the thoughts that come up. Just bring yourself back to the moment and to the task that you're doing. Some people like to just maybe time a few minutes, a few times per day, so 3 minutes here and there, and just notice their breath. The breath is a really good anchoring thing for mindfulness. And all it can be is, in your head, tell yourself, as you breathe in, and as you breathe out. Just even in your own, well, it'll have to be in your own head, because if you're breathing in and out and saying the words in and out, you're going to have a tough time and maybe hyperventilate. But really bringing yourself into that state of, all it has to be for, the 3 minutes, the 5 minutes that you choose to do is focus on the in-breath, focus on the out-breath. For those that would have conditions like asthma, or would have things like, what's that called? Claustrophobia, and find it actually quite uncomfortable to focus on the breath. A good exercise is to put your hands on your lap, and as you're breathing, just imagine something going in through your hands and back out through your hands. So that really what you're focusing on is that kind of flow in and out of something. You can picture tidal, or not a tidal wave. You can picture the tide going in and out. And it's just about that repetitive motion and really calming the mind as you're going through it. So any activity that you bring that small level of awareness to throughout your day will help to kick your brain into a mindful, receptive mode. It's going to help to bring you the benefits of bringing down stress levels, bringing up calm thinking, bringing down emotional responses, bringing up cognitive ability, um, bringing down worry, fret, bringing down maybe not aware behavior. So if you're acting out of an automatic state, it's going to really help to kick that executive part of the brain, your adult brain, to be in the moment and help you to make decisions that will benefit you long term. So that's it. That is a little bridge overview of mindfulness and how to apply it in a way that suits you, to really, really make the most of the benefits that it has to offer. And honestly, there's so many different ways that you can bring this in. Even doing your makeup, doing that mindfully. If you are playing golf mindfully, and it doesn't need to be the whole time, but just if you make it a habit of checking in with yourself a few times during the day of how do I bring awareness to this present moment, knowing that it's not just a practice that, if you're not spiritually minded, that it's a practice with actual benefits that are measurable, that are studied all through the world, hugely, and that will have a great impact on your life. Okay, that's me for today. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back in 2 weeks' time, and Andrew will be with you next week, and we will see you then. Bye.